Good morning and namaste, everyone. I'm, by the way, my name is Pradeep Bose. I'm substituting for Diane, who's not well today. So this morning, we are honored to welcome renowned journalist and author, Mr. Anshul Chaturvedi. Mr. Chaturvedi began his journalism career as a hard news journalist in 1996, and shortly thereafter, he became the editor of local English dailies based in Jammu, specializing in topics such as the Kashmir militancy and the ISI. In 2000, he moved on to work with the Times of India's launch edition in Chandigarh. And in 2005, he became editor of the Delhi Times. In the past few years, that role has expanded to include charge of many similar supplements in North India, and today he oversees featured teams in about a dozen cities. Aside from his primary job as the Delhi Times editor, Mr. Chaturvedi spends a lot of time reading, his favorite subjects being Swami Vivekananda, the Second World War, and Subhash Chandra Bose. I'm told he also enjoys watching cricket. He has published several highly reviewed books. One of them, A Bird from Afar, is a book of historical fiction set in 1942 with Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose in Berlin, in Nazi Germany, at the mercy of the Reich forces, on a mission to build an army to take on the British imperialist forces in India. Another book on Swami Vivekananda is entitled The Vivekananda Handbook for Everyday Living, an essential guide to applying the principles of Vivekananda to one's everyday life. Which brings us to the subject on which he will speak today, which is Vivekananda for everyday life, or everyday living. Mr. Chaturvedi, please.
Namaskar. Yeah? Yeah, okay. I may make a few references to, say, pop culture in India. I may use something in Hindi or elsewhere. If it's not coming through, just please let me know. I'll stop and explain the point further. I'm assuming almost everybody has a sense of who Vivekananda was. I didn't till quite some time. Like you saw, Sohail said in that interview the other day that if you're growing up in Bengal, you know about Vivekananda and Ramakrishna from a very early stage. I had no such introduction at an earlier point. And I think Vivekananda entered my life in an extremely random way. He was probably somebody who my Tauji, like my father's elder brother, used to perhaps read. I'd never met him. He passed away when I was very young. And when I was in class 12th, which in India is about 16, 17, that's phase, just about 11th and 12th, middle of that phase, is when I think my father had brought home a collection of books of his elder brother. Like maybe, mementos from his space to keep in his own study room. And fortunately, that was the era when there were no smartphones, there was Instagram. If you picked up a book, you actually read the book because you didn't have too much else to compete for your attention. And it is at that stage that when I read that book, what happened, and that was the primary one, teaching the Swami Vivekananda. It's a very summation book. It's not something in great detail. But when I read that, it took me a lot of time to absorb and comprehend what was going on in my own head as those thoughts grappled with mine. And much later, when I began to write on Subhash, and I read what Subhash had written about his own life, is when I found one quote from Subhash which summed up what my own experience was. And which is why I found a common link between the two people as well. Subhash Bose wrote, I was barely 15 when Vivekananda entered my life. There followed a revolution within and everything was turned upside down. I think that pretty much summarized the experience one had as well. And people have asked me what was the defining point of change when you read, because everybody has what's the inflection point, what connected you to somebody, to a movie, to a song. My primary thought was that he taught me that fear could be overcome. Because at that stage, teenage, I mean, today is slightly different, but inherently, teenage is a point where you do tend to question a lot of things, comprehend what you are. And, you could be an atheist at 12 and a fanatic at 14 and keep revolving because you haven't formed your thoughts and you react to what people are saying to you. And I was one of those students who was inherently what today you would call a nerd, somebody who would, get the good marks, but if my teachers told me, I want you to present this debate or this declamation in class 11th, I would have pretty much jumped off the roof but not done that. I did not want to do anything to do with people. I couldn't handle people. And I still remember, it's a very small point, but those of you who've studied in Indian school understand that, there's the house captain, the school captain and all that theatrics. I don't know how much it happens in the States. But so in class 11th, my teacher did say to me, you should stand up for house captain or something. And I remember the voting pool was about 60 people and I got 3 votes. So I said, I can top in the marks, but don't ask me to deal with people. And then post Vivekananda, purely for a lark, I fought the election for the school captain, which I won. So in that sense, and very small things, the way you sleep, your body language, from being in the fetal position to realizing that even when you lie down, you open up a little bit. You are a little less scared of the world. You do very random things, like if a particular place or a tree had this aura of, this is a haunted tree, don't go near it after dark. Before Vivekananda, I would always sidestep that area because it makes you, as a 12, 14-year-old, saying, okay, this could be something I don't understand. After reading him, for the heck of it, you would say, I'll go and stand there. I'll stand for half an hour and let me see what happens. So you begin to change your reactions in a very fundamental way. And at that stage also, what happens, you begin to think, okay, is this a fad? Is this because people do pick up random things in teenage. It could be fashion, it could be music, it could be something. And people wait and say, he'll outgrow it. It's a phase. It happens in youth. My parents also thought that. And at some point, some relatives came and they were quite mystified that he's sitting in his room for 2 hours and you open the room and there is incense all over. And what is he doing? This is not what people do at his age. So they consulted people actually, because I was the only child. And I don't think anybody thought that the idea of me venturing off into wearing robes like Swamiji would be, very popular in the normal domestic system. So it was that zone that everybody thought that, oh, this is just a book, everybody has something. I mean, people pick up Ayn Rand and for 5 years all they can talk about is Ayn Rand. So it's a phase, it'll go. The phase didn't go, which is the core point. And for those who are familiar to some degree, greater or lesser with popular Indian cinema or music, I'll make one passing reference and then not go back into Hindi again. But so what happened, Vivekananda for me was not somebody who was dry. Because religion becomes very dry when you try to intellectualize it. People say this is too heavy, too academic, too dense. Don't go towards this space. I've had filmmakers who I deal with in my professional capacity. When they talk to me about a movie, and I say, oh, this is a great movie, it's won a few awards as well, I realize. They said, yeah, it has, but please don't write about that. Because if you say it's an award-winning movie, nobody will come to watch it. It's meant too dense, too academic. So you have to remove the density from content for people to consume. It is what I understood through my regular training. And for me, I would say it's not intellectually dense. It was also philosophically, it was romantic in a sense. And what do I mean by romantic? That grand ideas appeal to you at that age in different ways. Now in cinema, things which appeals to me, I mean, Devanand being Devanand, right? And I pretty much would have picked up a cigarette, pretty much, because of him. I didn't do that finally, but hum dono. So when he says, barbadiyon ka jashan manata chala gaya, which inherently is that you celebrate what destruction comes your way in life. When I read that, when I heard that, I liked it as a popular culture thing. But then when I went back to read Vivekananda, I said, isn't this exactly what he is saying? What is the fear of loss? Celebrate loss. Out of our mouths will come the scriptures. What are you worried about what is happening to? He refuses to take a subservient position to anything at all. The quintessential rebel, whose rebellion never finished. Similarly, one of my favorite movies, I had a more melancholy taste in cinema, was Pyasa. And when Guru Dutt comes and says, "Ye duniya mil bhi jaye to kya hai?" Yet again, you would go back and say, but isn't this what he is saying? This life is not such a sweet thing. It is not worth so much concern and care and obsession. If things go, let them go. Let name and fame and money go. They are a terrible burden. Enjoy the space of freedom. That's not what we teach young boys growing up in the country. Name and fame and money are all that you live for. If they go, you are a failure. You haven't cracked the IAS. You haven't gotten to IIT. What are you even living for? But his mindset is very disruptive. And then for those who, and the last non-English space here, but in the ghazal space, Jagjit Singh, you buy something new, and CDs were new at that point of time. The CDs were very costly. They just started, I don't know, 620 rupees one CD. That was a lot of pocket money. आदमी आदमी को क्या देगा? जो भी देगा वही खुदा देगा. So it's a basic line saying, what can man give to man? Whatever is given will be given by the power above. And again, that's popular culture. Like that's a ghazal you play in your car or whatever. But this is exactly what he was saying. So for me, Vivekananda's teachings were not an aberration. They were not a deviation from normal life. Whatever resonated with me philosophically, emotionally, intellectually, in any other space, he always had something which was almost the same thing, said in even sharper, more precise. I mean, his language was very, very sharp. And one of the fears you have when you start writing on Vivekananda is that you are writing about somebody whose writing is so proficient that no matter what you do, you'll fall short of the original itself. It's like being like these actors who copy famous actors. I mean, how do you match the original? So that fear has been there. I don't know how much the journey has worked or not. But that's the larger space as to how does Vivekananda enter one's life and how does he stay with that? And when the fad did not move, and I'm not exaggerating when I say my parents called astrologer to say, is he going to be this? Is he going to wear this and run away because we have only one son? What's happening here? So I do remember the actual person came and said, no, like he'll be inclined, but I don't think he'll be able to do it right now. So they were pretty happy, okay, it's fine, it'll go. But it still didn't go. That, I think, is the point. Because a lot of teen or 20s ideological romance in many things, in activism, in anything else, it's all good for that age. And then people tell you, this is not practical life. This doesn't stay. Whether it is people in the bureaucracy, people in any other system, or in medicine, people come in and say, I will serve, I will do this, I will follow this philosophy. But then the real world holds you and trains you and says, look, this is too complicated to live. It's good you talked about it, good you read about it, but you can't actually do it. So at that stage, I also would hear these things that, these things you're saying to other people, to your peer group, the things you're writing, this is all very good, it's very bookish, but he was an otherworldly man. And that's the point we say, oh, you're otherworldly. This is not day-to-day, this is not practical, beta. That's what you tell every Indian boy. This is not practical. Practical is getting the job. What is Vivekananda? What's the salary? That's life. So you have to, so the challenge was to, not a challenge, it was a natural process, is to not let him become something archaic, episodic, and in an intellectual fling with something and keep it there. Oh, in my 60s, when I was a teenager, I really liked this writing. No. In everything I faced, if I had a battle within the family, if I had a battle at office, if I had a emotional decision to make which had caught me completely into catch-22, every single time, 1 line, 2 lines, 3 lines, they brought me answers. And I used every single highlighter I had in that space. I'll maybe come across and show it to you for a second. So I can't carry the book as a book because it's pretty much messed up now, but the letters of Vivekananda are completely gone. But they are from about 30 years back. Similarly, some other books. And a lot of it is very messy. It's pretty much gone now. But it's stuff like this. Highlighting from that stage, small things. And that state. So when in anything I began to quote him back. And then I realized that when I started working as well for something, it was a managerial question, and I went back to Vivekananda. And that time we were told, 7 Habits, Stephen Covey, all of that. And I said, look, this person is monopolizing my mind space. I'm saying, no, I don't need Covey, I've read Vivekananda. And people say, excuse me? what is Vivekananda in management? Why is he a reference point? So I thought rather than talk about it, I wrote a piece. And this is probably my first piece on Vivekananda published in the Indian media, on the speaking tree of the Times of India. And the piece was titled The Manager Monk. And that time it got me a few reactions saying, well, this is very odd, like a managerial HR exercise coming through a monk who never handled anything. I mean, what was the profit and loss of Vivekananda's work? But it made sense to me. And so I began to say, he's pretty much my Dale Carnegie of my teens and my Stephen Covey of my 20s. Which, ergo, was not an otherworldly space anymore. It was a practical, functional space. So this narrative grew over time with people saying this is this eccentric guy who quotes Vivekananda for everything. I said, but I'm living it. No, it's not that I'm sitting otherworldly. I'm earning my salary each month, but when I have a debate, when I have a question, when I have a professional battle, I'm citing this back to you. I put up 4 of his quotes on my workstation, and this is what I handle things by. So it works perfectly fine for me. I don't know why you think it's so esoteric. It's not esoteric for me. And along that phase, in that era, I also realized that sequentially what he had done was, first he taught me how to handle myself. My self-doubt, my worry about mortality, my worry about losing people, things, issues. And then he began to teach me how to handle the others. Like how to handle, being, an intrusive family member, a not so congenial colleague. So it was a cyclical training, which I realized in hindsight when I had seen that phase. And then about 10, 12 years back, there was a piece I wrote, which was on Vivekananda's birthday, which I think at that point summed up the journey of the last, I think I was in my 40s at that stage, so maybe 30 years of reading about him, came into a single piece. I have summed the piece up in the book. I'll want to read it from it, and that will get you a sense of how that larger journey was, and then I'll come back to the larger discussion. So the title of the subhead was, From age 17 onwards, the man who's helped me navigate life. Vivekananda's philosophy would have meant nothing to me if I could not have applied it practically. Please tell me if I need to slow down. I'm told I speak too fast. I am not so much a student of Vivekananda, but a practitioner of his ideas, applying some of them as and when my daily experiences offer the scope to do so, to the degree my understanding allows. I did not study or analyze all that he did or said. I searched only for what helped me navigate my everyday life. In my teens and 20s, the absorption was the easiest. There weren't so much analysis, but more a reflex at instinct. The odd thing in my case was that I wasn't a rebel tamed by a saffron-clad monk, but a docile, sickly, horribly unsocial child, an only child at that, who would avoid walking up to anyone where it could be helped, who would rather jump off the balcony than get onto a stage to give a speech. Vivekananda made me a teen rebel. Following the sort of rebellion that does not rely on how much hair you have on your head or how sculpted your biceps are, but of the kind that tends to be age-proof and goes on. Between 17 and 47, it's now been some 30 years of cherry-picking ideas and thoughts from the 39 years of Vivekananda's lifespan. The rebellion ebbs and flows, but it never goes away. A quick-to-fear teenager, I hated conflict, feared the dark, and was petrified of closed spaces and lifts. I would look over my shoulder when walking late at night. Fear is the greatest sin my religion teaches. That was the most profound lesson that Vivekananda taught me repeatedly. I still hate lifts, but most of the fears of my childhood burned themselves out through the teens and 20s, courtesy of the Swami. If I was afraid of getting on a stage, I ensured I did it over and over. If a densely forested area gave me the creeps, I forced myself to go there after sunset and stand there where it felt the creepiest. Seeing fear as a sin and as the apex of the list of sins, I tried to step to conquer it in as many small battles I could. Those battles dominated my growing up years. The defiant I don't care tone of the cocky youngster was something I tried to assimilate as a simple statement of fact. Let this or that happen, I actually don't care. Vivekananda turned out to be a better handler of my anxiety than all the books good old Dale Carnegie wrote on how to stop worrying and start living. I stopped 70% of my worrying after I started reading Vivekananda. Given my mind as I entered my teens, I would probably have crashed from stress-related disorders had I not followed Vivekananda. His words, "I will die 1,000 deaths rather than lead a jellyfish existence and yield to every requirement of this foolish world," helped me fight many moments when my more hesitant self, the side of me that hated conflict, would have probably preferred to adjust and accommodate. I would ask myself if I was getting into the reflex of leading a jellyfish existence just to yield to every requirement. And this was often deeply uncomfortable because the answer was yes. I taught myself not to worry about every requirement. Anyone can handle a comfortable existence. Vivekananda's prescription to handle an existence that is not comfortable was quite simple. The mother's child shall be a hero, a Mahavir. In unhappiness, sorrow, death and desolation, the mother's child shall always remain fearless. If you work about trying to be fearless in these situations, what else is there to worry about? If it can stay in the mind, that is. Sometimes it doesn't stay, so you recurrently absorb it. Pages of my diaries from the 90s today leave me wondering how I retained some of my sanity through that phase. I think in retrospect, the clearest mind I had engaged with, Vivekananda's, had legitimized the angst of questioning without the need to seek immediate answers. An early page in my battered copy of the Letters of Swami Vivekananda, this one, has this highlighted line. That sort of regret and dissatisfaction is a very good, it's the prelude to improvement. He who puts on a turban and immediately sees the Lord progresses thus far and no further. You are blessed indeed to have constant dissatisfaction preying upon your mind. Rest assured that there is no danger for you. When I read that, it taught me a very important lesson. Vivekananda made me see constant dissatisfaction as a growth trait, not as a psychological issue to be addressed. So then you are not hesitant saying, I am unsettled, but you should be unsettled if you at some point want to be settled. You're not in a hurry to find a philosophical answer in 6 months. That's not how life operates. Most things I had planned to do by 19 were in a shambles by the time I was 24. My mind was restless, despondent, often sleepless, no one to turn to help. I sat quietly and reflected on Vivekananda's words. Human help I spurned with my foot. He who has been with me through hills and dales, deserts and forests will be with me, I hope. If not, some heroic soul would arise sometime or the other, abler than myself, and carry it out. I taught myself to get used to that basic idea, to stop beseeching for human help, to understand and accept that some things are not meant to be if he has decided that they aren't. It is not a lesson you learn in a day, but once you do, it is well worth the time spent on learning it. The period between 24 and 40 roughly was, for me as for most of us, the phase of entering and surviving the world outside. I had many grand thoughts when I was finishing school. I fancied my chances at making it big early in life, being a known name, holding a position of power or a fancy paycheck. None of that happened. My first jobs were teaching at a minuscule coaching center and then working as a sub-editor at an unknown paper in a lane in interior Jammu. While my friends and smarter cousins cracked the civil services, became doctors, or went into IT and IM. My ego and self-esteem did not take very well to this. I wondered whether my life would turn out to be mediocre, unnoticed. Then Vivekananda told me, in his usual forthright style, do not be afraid of small beginnings. Great things come afterwards. Be courageous. I learnt with some difficulty to not despair at small beginnings and fought the fear of being inconsequential and irrelevant. When through my 20s, neither what I did nor what I worked at seemed to be flamboyant enough to fit in my opinion of myself, there were moments began the temptation to do things superficially began to kick in. You think, what am I doing here? I could be in a bigger place. Then you begin to want to do it less efficiently because you think you will someday do something grander. Drudgery, routine, and a junior status is not a great motivator. I caught myself grumbling. And then Vivekananda was quick to rap me on the knuckles, reminding me, he who grumbles at the little thing that has fallen to his lot will grumble at everything. He warned me where that would lead. Always grumbling, he will lead a miserable life. I looked around, saw that what he was saying was true, and I stopped justifying my stupidity to myself. Then I finally understood the import of his words when he said, "The man who does his duty as he goes, putting his shoulder to the wheel, higher and higher duties will fall to his share." I stopped wasting time in self-pity after that. I decided to put my shoulder to the wheel, no matter what the work assigned, and left it to the inherent truth of what he said, because I believed in what he said, to play itself out. The moment I gained the slightest relevance, however, it brought an unexpected add-on almost instantly, which has refused to leave my side since then: hostility. It took the shape of sharp, sustained, often bitter opposition. And opposition unsettles you. You don't know how to handle it. You consider walking away to get a breather, but the world is the same everywhere. How do you know situation B will be any kinder than situation A is? So as I first faced and then I got accustomed to flag, I read and then reread again what Vivekananda said to his disciples. "Have faith that you are my brave lads, born to do great things. Let not the barks of puppies frighten you. No, not even the thunderbolts of heaven. Stand up and work." He explained from his own experience, in his fiery fashion. The names of those who will wish to injure us will be legion. But is that not the surest sign of us having the truth? The more I have been opposed, the more my energy has always found expression. And so, fingers crossed that the more I have been opposed rule was not for Vivekananda alone, I stood up and continued to do what made sense to me, paying no attention to the disapproval of puppies or the thunderbolts of heaven alike. That worked for upfront confrontations, but then there's always the other kind. Slander and innuendo snake their way around you. And the taking it heads on doesn't solve issues over there. If anything, it brings up the "don't wrestle with the pig" reflex. When I faced that first, it was very unfamiliar and disturbing. For a while, I was nostalgic about being irrelevant, because nobody tells tales about a nobody. But then, I looked to get even, which is not a good answer in these situations. But then I realized that somebody as Teflon coated as a Swami was not spared either. So what was I cribbing about? Of all the people, Vivekananda's way of life in the US had been questioned. His response? "Tell my friends that a uniform silence is my answer to my detractors. If I give them tit for tat, it would bring me down to a level with them. Tell them that the truth will take care of itself." Full stop. I learned that my efforts to get even would mean engaging on an equal level. So I let anyone say what they wish to. If that is what is needed for drawing a sense of fulfillment, to each his own. I have to assume that in due course the truth will take care of itself. We give too much weight to gossip. A uniform silence is a tool we use far too rarely, but it has its merits. Do try it. The absence of a response is also a response. By the time my 30s came, my body was already beginning to tire. The 20s had extracted their toll. As stress and abundance in money had been scarce, there were many days I looked despondently, wistfully at how many years filled with 12-hour workdays had gone by, and I was still attempting to make something of my life. Far too many people younger to me seemed to be discussing sabbaticals and posting pictures from their global traveling. I would wonder whether all that rebellion was worth anything at all, when you had no fame, no rest, and the only evidence was of the critics. But Vivekananda, unforgiving teacher that he was, would still not allow self-pity to be legitimized. That is his interference in my life throughout. He doesn't let you accept that, "Oh my God, why God me?" So no, deal with it. "Wait," he said. "Wait, money does not pay, nor fame." With those two lines, he wipes out all your issues if you don't go by that benchmark. Money does not pay, nor fame. Fame does not pay, nor learning. It is love that pays. It is character that cleaves its way through adamantine walls of difficulties. It was not an easy lesson to learn from him. After all, he himself had done so much and wrapped up his lifespan before 40. And I had done not much in my 30s. But I tried. I looked back at the most vulnerable points of my life and asked myself whether I had lasted through them because I had power or money or fame, or because I stuck to a few basics in my life. I figured out my answers, realized that money, name and fame had been utterly irrelevant in coming out in one piece from life's most complex moments, and I tried not to overrate them thereafter, whether they come or they go. When wish after wish was unfulfilled, when compromise became the default, when grand plans recurrently crashed from want of resources, when I got tired of the endless waits by my bank balance and lost my cool and sense of tranquility sometimes, I went back to him to curb my anger. And he told me, was it ever in the history of the world that any great work was done by the rich? It is the heart and the brain that do it, not the purse. Again, I did a reality check, found sense in what he was saying, and stopped assuming that my life was incapable of great things just because my bank account emptied before each month end. Now, in my late 40s, I'm 50 now, but it's from then, older but not much wiser, I pay my house EMIs, school fees, track interest rates and cholesterol levels, attend office reviews, essentially live the middle-aged, middle-class life. But the mindset still continues to be rebellious. And when I look back, the credit for whatever defines persistent curiosity that has survived within me goes largely or maybe entirely to picking up Vivekananda's teachings. As Roman Roland wrote, I cannot touch these sayings of his, scattered as they are through the pages of this book at 30 years distance, without receiving a thrill through my body like an electric shock. And what shock, what transport must have been produced when, in burning words, they issued from the lips of the hero. Roland wasn't exaggerating. His teachings are like an electric shock. Plug in. That was the larger story of coming to that universe. And after this is like 2013, so it's been 10 to 12 years since I wrote that element. I wrote things here and there, and then people began to say, okay, I also want to understand Vivekananda in my life. Like if I choose not to become a monk, if I choose not to join the mission, then what is he for me? And I would say, okay, I'll recommend something to you. But then I realized that there wasn't a book like that. Because Vivekananda, writing on the Vivekananda has been primarily from the space of people who have also traveled the path that he has traveled. People like from a Roman Roland or to many people who have been ordained monks have written about him. They've written about his life. They've written about Ramakrishna. That universe, which it cuts directly to the heart of people who are in that space. But for the lay person who's studying at a college in New York or Delhi, if he does not plan to join a monastic order, does he then read that much about Vivekananda? If he is not interested in the deeper writings of the person, like an award-winning film, this is very complicated, it's very intense, I'll read it when I have retired. Mm-hmm. It just stays there. So since I couldn't find a book to recommend to people, like if somebody is 12 or 14 and he wants to understand what this is, I realized that today also people wouldn't have the bandwidth the way you had 30 years back. The fragmentation is way too higher. So in that sense, perhaps the thought was that if you see Vivekananda as this huge ship which can take you across the ocean, and he has that mass, but a huge ship cannot come up to the beach to pick you by its very nature. It has to anchor a mile out in the sea. You need a transport to take you from the beach to the ship. And maybe the book was an attempt at providing that bridge which is not so complicated to board. And maybe you read that and then you want to read him. Because once you start reading him, then you don't need to come back to me or anybody else who's been writing. But at least you have to demystify it. That was the larger objective. Now, from this, I would want to bring 3 topics for the reference of people, because there are things I think I have in my own head, spelled out in a little more detail. One I've talked about, which is work basics, and we can come back to that in the Q&As if we need to.
Slow down.
Okay. So the work basics is a topic I can come back to once we wrap this up, in case anybody has a thought on that, because Vivekananda work is the counterintuitive space. People don't refer to a monk for understanding, but they read what CEOs have written about work. But for me, it's worked pretty well so far. I'm 50 now. How much more do I have to handle anyway? The other thing was because religion has become a little stronger over the last half a decade everywhere in the world. Places, icons, buildings, monuments, everything gets talked about with much more fervor from it was when I was a child, I think. And sometimes people ask me for opinions on things about structure, monument, prayer, faith, worship, fasting, the externals of religion, so to say. And in that, I think the primary thing which has always shaped my thinking is Vivekananda and Kir Bhavani. Now, this also comes because I have also grown up in Jammu and Kashmir for quite a bit. My father was posted in Srinagar for a while. I've been to Amarnath, I've been to Vaishnavi, and I've been to Kheer Bhavani subsequently. And so there is this story that why, I'll tell you how the track happened. I had gone to Amarnath when I was, I think, 18 or 19. And because at that point my father was handling the security system of that region, so I could go slightly before the crowds came with the police, when they were opening it. And I went to the cave. There was not many people there at that stage. They haven't allowed the rest of the people to start coming on the yatra. I sat there for a bit, and then you hear that fluttering sound, and then you see the pigeons there. And I didn't know that there was a tale about the pigeons. I hadn't done much reading about it. And you wonder at that altitude how you don't normally see birds there. And I had an old camera, the ones with the reels and all that. I took a couple of pictures, and I told a couple of people, look at this. And they said, look at what? I said, look at this. They look at what? I didn't know what to make of that discussion. I let it be. When I developed the reel only had the rock. I still haven't figured that out. So I left it as something, okay, whatever, I don't know, maybe the camera malfunctioned. Then I began reading Vivekananda. I hadn't come to this part of him because I read him in segments over a decade or so in different things. And then he said, I went to Amarnath. And then he said, I saw the pigeons. And he said, if you see the pigeons, it's believed that you have actually had a darshan of the deity over there. I didn't even know that till I read him and said, oh, is that something? So I began to read more about his Amarnath Yatra. He said, I felt like Shiva has come on my head and has not gone for 24 hours. I don't even know what that means as a child. Like, Shiva is on my head for 24 hours. What does it mean philosophically? We don't even get that. What does it mean to us? From there, he went to Kheer Bhavani. And I think he stayed for a week or so at Kheer Bhavani, and he was offering his worship to the deity and so on and so forth. And then one day he says, and he's saying this in this talks with Vivekananda, the disciples, so it's not in his writings. So he says, I'll maybe take it out, because I still have that marked for a very long time. So yeah, I mean, it's there for a very long time, the Kheer Bhavani thing here. So I'll read it out from here actually. A few days after returning Srinagar, he went to visit Kheer Bhavani Devi and stayed there for 7 days, worshipping the Devi and making offering of kheer to her. Every day he used to worship the Devi with a mound of kheer as offerings. One day, while worshipping, the thought arose in Swamiji's mind. Mother Bhavani has been manifesting her presence here for untold years. The Mohammedans came and destroyed her temple, yet the people of the place did nothing to protect her. Alas, if I was then living, I could never have borne it silently. When thinking in this strain, his mind was much oppressed with sorrow and anguish. He distinctly heard the voice of the mother saying, "It was according to my desire that they destroyed this temple. It is my desire that I should live in a dilapidated temple. Otherwise, can I not immediately erect a 7-story temple of gold here if I like? What can you do? Shall I protect you or shall you protect me?" Swamiji said, "Since hearing the divine voice, I cherish no more plans. The idea of building much, etc. I have given up. As the mother wills, so it will be." This stayed with me for a very long time, because shall I protect you or shall you protect me is a very fundamental point. We try to defend faith, but I'm sure the cosmos existed before man was born on this planet. When the dinosaurs were here, there were no temples or mosques or churches, yet I'm sure God was fully functional without needing us to do something to empower him. So whenever I have had that sense of vanity, I will contribute to religion. I have realized, excuse me, but it is a 7-story temple of gold I cannot build for the deity. I don't have the money for it, but she can do it if she wants to. So who is protecting whom? And when this thought came to me, the other thought which came to me was the one which Ramakrishna would say to Vivekananda, in terms of what is your model of worshipping the deity. And he would use the benchmark of the monkey and the cat. That the baby monkey holds on to the mother as he jumps from tree to tree. And it is the responsibility of the child to hold on, because if he slips, he falls. The cat holds the kitten. It is no longer the kitten's responsibility how things go. It is the mother's responsibility. So Ramakrishna would say, I am the kitten. Mother has held me. It is not my problem how it goes from here. So that is the space. Kheer Bhavani in that sense, because today we talk so much about from X country to Y country, monuments, buildings and faith are so important. But this switched off in my head forever, the question of saying, I will contribute to faith. No, faith will exist before, it was good before I was born, it will be okay after I died. I don't think I can defend faith. I need her to defend me. It's not an equal relationship. That's one segment of generally responding to things. The other thing, which is maybe an abstract takeaway from Vivekananda, is something which I think I should copyright this. It is the Mr. Hudson effect. I'll read this out because it relates to the USA any which way. I found it very useful in life, so far, so forth. So the subhead is called the Mr. Hudson test. This is a very specific lesson I took away from a letter Vivekananda wrote. One that has taught me to filter what to react and what to ignore. It's applicable across life, but I apply it most often to the workplace. The lines that I underlined, highlighted and circled from the letters of Vivekananda were, now this is in the context of people, the press in the USA writing about him, and then people from India writing to him saying the press is saying this about you, please respond. Please, write back. And there also I remember, even though I'm in the newspaper business, but it was a good line that he says, what the editors write about me, I collect and make an offering to the fire god. So that tonality is there. But he's responding to somebody who wrote a piece about him, trashing him. Every undertaking must pass through a lot of obstacles. Truth triumphs if only one pursues a peaceful course. I have no need to reply to what a Mr. Hudson has spoken against me. In the first place, it is unnecessary. And secondly, I shall be bringing myself down to the level of the people of Mr. Hudson's type. Are you mad? Shall I fight from here with one Mr. Hudson? Through the Lord's grace, people who are far above Mr. Hudson in rank listen to me with veneration. This is one para from the book. Now from this one para, I drew many, many lessons. It's a passing line in a letter where Vivekananda is responding to his disciples' flagging of criticism about him from a gentleman, presumably Mr. Hudson, and urging him to write a note of rebuttal. It enabled me to take a lifetime of decisions caught in a dilemma. The dilemma, of course, is how to respond to upfront criticism and flag, as well as below-the-belt personal attacks. Beyond a point, the disagreeable things said by people don't just make us think, but they also irritate, upset, and anger us. Should we therefore react to them by simply ignoring them? It is tempting. But then we will never correct ourselves in every space, even if the criticism is genuine and legitimate. As Vivekananda wrote elsewhere, we are all tempted to think too highly of ourselves. By assuming that all that we do is grand and desirable, we will stay fixated in our behavior, our thought and reflexes. Should we then search our soul for the motive behind every critical comment that we make? Should we change our life patterns for every individual who doesn't take a fancy to our way of living? But do we owe people that much? More so when the bulk of flack today is anonymous, like on social media. Will the critics do some for our feedback as well, but we won't offer it? So it's a one-way street. They change our lives, we don't change theirs. Do we include innuendo, gossip, trolling and grapevine? Is it to be called feedback when you don't even know who's giving it? And what about people who don't like a face? Should we change the face for them as well? What do you do about criticism? So what do we look to be? Obstinate, narcissistic and dismissive criticism? Or petrified people pleasers, spending sleepless nights when we hear unflattering things about ourselves? There are no easy answers to this. But here is where Mr. Hudson helps. My first takeaway was this: I have no need to reply to what Mr. Hudson has spoken against me. This in itself is a point here. The more I thought about this, the less and less frequently I began to respond to any remarks, opinions or snide commentary. Over time, I realized that usually there is no need to reply. What we are reacting to is vanity. It is, I don't know how many of you have sort of lived in Delhi, but if in Delhi a car touches your car, the rule is you stop the car, you jump out, you start yelling. It is not needed, but it is a rite of passage that this is what is done. It's a tribal dance being played out on the road. Because you are angry, how did you do this to me? It doesn't change anything. You can ignore it. So we do things because, how did he say this to me? He said it, and then what? There's no need to respond, but it's our ego which makes us say, if I don't answer, there's something amiss over here. It's never comes from the necessity to do it. When something is spoken against us, very rarely is it worthy of a response. On most occasions, when we react, it's not because it was required. We react because we are irked or our ego is hurt, or our honor demands that we counter this nonsense. But you don't need to. 20 years ago, when I looked at some of the battles I was getting into, I asked myself, did I really need to reply to Mr. Hudson? Today, every week, I see celebrities or leaders or their fans going hammer and tongs on each other on Twitter for some argument. When I trace back where a particular spat began, I wonder, did X need to reply to what Y had said? What did it achieve? Mr. Hudson has a right to opinion about you. Let him express it. What of it? You don't have to answer him. That legitimizes his opinion. You may be important enough or relevant for Mr. Hudson to hold opinion about you and voice it. So what? The opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is indifference. By tearing into you, Mr. Hudson has displayed his inability to be indifferent to you. Do you find him relevant enough to have to say something back to him? Why? Disengage. Let the vacuum swallow the response. Don't fear it. So most times when I am tempted to counter a point, I go back to 1895, and I think of people urging Vivekananda to react to Mr. Hudson's dim view of the monk from India. Vivekananda did not reply. Perhaps that was seen by some as a victory for Mr. Hudson's opinion at that point of time. And then I remind myself that here I am, 125 years later, trying to write a book about Vivekananda. I have not the least idea who Mr. Hudson was. So, trolling, abusing or slandering somebody is not victory. It's just angst-filled catharsis. Let's leave it where it is. Let us live out our lives. Let us not rush to respond to every word spoken against us. Let our Mr. Hudsons revel in our unwillingness to reply. Let them see it as our inability to respond. And let them have a happy life on that account. What does it cost you? The first layer. The second part is even more educated. Quote unquote. Are you mad? Shall I fight from here with one Mr. Hudson? Through the Lord's grace, people who are far above Mr. Hudson in rank listen to me with veneration. From this, I draw a rule of thumb that has served me very well so far and may be of some utility to you as well. When I am being criticized, I try to figure out the opinions of A. Mr. Hudson, B. Mr. Hudson's peers, and C. those who I think of as Mr. Hudson's superiors, for want of a better word. For instance, let us say Mr. Hudson thinks that my writing is the worst he has ever seen, and I should quit this space altogether. I should be worried if that's opinion shared widely. But if someone, quote unquote, far above Mr. Hudson in rank, let us say an accomplished author who I have great regard for, he sends me words of encouragement, then I may not just quit writing right now. I shall, however, refrain from fighting for Mr. Hudson at the same time. Cricket fans in India are hugely emotional and passionate about the game. After a bad series, New Zealand right now, there are many who feel that a few or all players should give up the game altogether. On social media, every batsman who's going through a bad patch receives unsolicited advice on a range of issues from his grip to his marriage. If I was a batsman facing flack after a series where I had failed, I would apply Vivekananda here. Perhaps Mr. Hudson thinks I should change my grip, my stance, my coach, my attitude, or my special someone, or all of these. Some of these might be valid, or Mr. Hudson may just be in a bad mood that day. Before I go changing everything about my game or announcing my retirement, I should also get a sense of the viewpoint of those who are far above Mr. Hudson in rank. Maybe people who have played 50 test matches, maybe people who have captained Team India. If they too share the sentiment that I'm not cut out to play at this international level, then maybe I need to rethink. But if they think differently, if they think my basics are good, and in fact they tell me to hang in there because they see me as the next Sachin or Dravid or Steve Smith, then I need to keep Mr. Hudson away from charting out my life's path. So the rank here is not about stature. As the Peter principle often reminds us, merely being at a superior rank in a formal hierarchy is not the same thing as being more capable. Even if Sachin is not the captain, he is still the best batsman in the team. But rank here is about Mr. Hudson being qualified to give me wisdom. So here, in whatever, whether we sing, act, write, run an office, run a mission, design a car, style hair, many will have views, good or bad, about what we do and how we do it. We must therefore actively seek out the views of those qualified to comment on us and to have a reality check on us. But the views of the most opinionated must not become important just because they are loud and shrill. When I hear, for example, that Mr. Hudson is of the opinion that I know nothing about how running my office, I check for two things. Has Mr. Hudson actually run an office? In any manner, efficiently and inefficiently? Is he qualified to assess my managerial failings? And would he run my office better tomorrow if I gave it to him? B, over the past few years, people who have seen my work, who are bigger than me, more competent, more established, and who are therefore, to quote Vivekananda, above Mr. Hudson in rank, have they also found my work to be generally useless? If the answer to both is no, then there's nothing more I intend to do about it, including thinking about it. So this has been the larger universe, the larger philosophy of this space, that what we think we are facing, pressure, slander, whatever, even though he was in an otherworldly space, he hadn't all of that. When we talk about people not responding to us in terms of how much we give them, he talks to you about relationships. He says, the world is your friend till you're its slave and no more. He talks about the hell of emotionalism. He says, I wish I was an orphan and had no relatives. He's extreme in all his views, but he has faced all of that. So the bulk of this is how the narration goes in terms of whether... So it's a 3-cycle book in that sense, dealing with yourself, dealing with your fear, your chaos, so to say, dealing with work, because work has become such a big part of life for 20, 30 years. If you can handle that, then you're going to trip emotionally. And the third is dealing with others in the sense... for those from India, you understand, the whole Sharma ji ka beta point. What have you done? What has the other person's son done? How much marks did he get? What happened? Like the whole narrative. You didn't clear the civil services, you're a failure at life. That universe of, getting the... And so when I read about that, I would go back to, again, Vivekananda getting a letter from India saying, your food in the USA, is it as per the system? And then he had this word, silly bossism without a mite of real help. And he said, if people writing to me have a problem with my food here, let them send me a cook from India. But if you're not doing that, so then I realize in so many parts in our own lives, especially in the Asian culture that we have, silly bossism without a mite of real help is very ingrained into the way we deal with things. We are told, we know your best interest, but do you? And if I was in a crisis tomorrow, would you help me out? No, but take our advice. But I want to take advice one way. Can't work that way. So in so many small layers, across everyday living, daily dilemmas, I have not yet found a person to go to beyond this. Now, how does this journey move from here? Two things also come in. One, that some people say, okay, you wrote the book when in your 40s, but you began reading about him at 16, 17, so it takes 30 years to write a book. I had a thought for that as well, which again came from Vivekananda. So, he summarizes all my quote points are from the same person. It's I think pretty monopolistic, but it is what it is. So page 168 has a point which I think applies to all of us who are in this universe, who talk about things. In my early years, as I read a lot about Vivekananda while attempting to grasp the Gita and Yogananda and others, I wondered why people didn't share my interests. Now, what would you think of a 16-year-old saying to you, come, let's read Vivekananda? That's not very popular in college. Charged with all this newly acquired knowledge, I engaged in discussions with debates, wrote letters, sent books to friends, and conversed endlessly with if I thought somebody else had missed the point of existence. As I entered the workspace, I often exited and reflected to lecture those happiest souls working with me. My Vivekananda obsession with how we work be more important than what we did translated into endless amounts of unwanted advice to people on the way they were approaching work and why they were not growing philosophically. I questioned, reprimanded, cajoled, and wondered why people would do anything less than put their life's blood into their work. Like all unwanted advice, whether to a teenage child or to a young employee, it's often not welcome. I also suspect that it did not fit in with any rational concept of a work-life balance in people's minds. After inflicting much of my unsolicited wisdom on unwilling listeners over the years, at a recent point in time, probably far later than I ought to have, I paid great attention to Vivekananda on the following points. Quote unquote. This man, Ramakrishna, sought no one. His principle was first form character, first form spirituality, and the results will come of themselves. His favorite illustration was, when the lotus opens, the bees come of their own accord to seek the honey. So let the lotus of your character be full blown and the results will follow. This is a great lesson to learn. My master taught me this lesson hundreds of times, yet I often forget it. Few understand the power of thought. If a man goes into a cave, shuts himself in, and thinks one really great thought and dies, that thought will penetrate the walls of that cave. It will vibrate through space and penetrate the whole human race. Such is the power of thought. And then I have underlined this part. Be in no hurry, therefore, to give your thoughts to others. First, have something to give. Therefore, first, make character. That is the highest duty you can perform. Know truth for yourself, which is the key part, and there will be many to whom you can teach it afterwards. They will all come. That was the attitude of my master. The only thing I can claim to have in common with Vivekananda is just like him. My master taught me this hundreds of times, and yet I often forget it. The sequence is continued. And once I got this, I realized, and then given the space I inhabit, I would often say that the thing to remember is that you cannot send a press note to call the bees. If there is nothing in the flower, they will not come. And that's what we often miss today. We think that by bombarding the world for a movie opening, for a song, we'll get people to come. But that is not the core point. We often, so this point that in a very vocal model where today everybody has a thought, in the next 3.5 seconds they have to share the thought with the world, he says, no, do not be in a hurry to give your thoughts. So I said, if I took 30 years, I think that's a fair time. It's not very late, it's fine. And that is about it. Have I taken up my time?
Right on time.
Okay, so I'll take 3 minutes more. Because now what happens, as this book developed, there was a last lesson to be learnt. And that happened in the process of writing it, in the process of dealing with people who were dealing with me and the book. Again, because I am an editor, I am a difficult person to work with for other editors. They want to do the books their way, I want it my way. But I'll read out the last 3 pages of the book and they'll summarize what the thought process has been. The older I grow, the more everything seems to me to lie in manliness. This is Vivekananda's quote. There's one index I have used in the last few years, mostly in my 40s, to get a sense of whether or not I have understood anything of Vivekananda's teachings. And that is whether my frequency of referring to him is reducing. I first realized this was happening in the course of the assorted pieces I wrote about him in the last 15 odd years. And while referring to the notes for this book, the tone kept changing over time. As a writer, that caused me and a potential publisher some distress, because to come back or a topic or a thing is easier if you're thinking the same way when you wrote the first draft. But as an individual, the change, the disconnect to some original thoughts, the diminishing of the need to refer to guidance, and the creeping in of a tone that, as my publisher said to me, more about how you think than about how Vivekananda thought. That gradual shift is very educative. And when I understood it, it was a bit of growing up or outgrowing. I do not know which. And then as I saw it happening, I acknowledged and appreciated the brilliance of Vivekananda as a teacher. Throughout his life, he explained that the points of lives of the incarnations themselves, be it Christ or be it Buddha, was not about worshipping their personalities, but about absorbing their lives. He worshipped Ramakrishna unquestioningly after he doubted him intensely. So, quote unquote, I fought my master for 6 years with the result that I know every inch of the way. That 6 years fight is important to know. Without that, this wouldn't have happened. Vivekananda questioned everything, everyone, and recurrently and sharply slammed the instinct of unthinking obedience to a cause, belief, or person, no matter how great. He trashed the mindless adherence to rituals or practices merely because they had been practiced for centuries. He was not God-fearing, Indeed, he did not think that he would get very close to God if he were the fearing sort of person in the first place. He was anything but a believer in the wisdom of numbers. Quote unquote. What you call the majority is mainly composed of fools and men of common intellect. Men who have brains to think of themselves are few everywhere. This is hardly less than political correctness. Over and over, he reiterated his disdain for judging a person or idea on the basis of what the majority view was on a given day. That view changes. On some days, he was gentle and compared the masses to children who have yet to understand things. On other days, he was sharper and less forgiving of common intellect. Vivekananda did not look to make followers. He did not take pride in him or Ramakrishna being venerated as individuals alone. Through whatever he said and through whatever he lived, he reiterated over and over again, do not worship an idea, a guru, a teacher or a master, however great, unquestioningly. Do not accept an idea, a thought or a practice, no matter how popular, how ancient, how widespread, unquestioningly. Stand not with folded hands and bowed heads before either the grandeur of personality or the weight of popular opinion, is what Vivekananda says to me through the story of his life. Think for yourself. And so, as time went by, I realized that the more I followed him and subconsciously absorbed bits and pieces of his basics, the more idea of following in itself seemed to be not something to aspire for. By absorbing what Vivekananda was hammering into my mind day after day, without it even being a conscious effort, I learned to not blindly believe in unquestioned, undisputable truths, but to doubt, to question. I learned to stay cynical, to ask, to not be God-fearing, but to find the idea of fearing God to be a very pedestrian one. From this man to God, I learned to not blindly trust the words of any man of God just because he had masses of followers. My apologies, Swamiji, for the next line. From the saffron-clad monk, I learned to not leave only to saffron-clad men the interpretation of my rights and wrongs because they were saffron or white or black, but to still question. Almost imperceptibly, I began that the less blindly I hero worshipped him, the greater was his victory in transforming my thought. After all, does the victory of a philosophy lie in the need of the follower to keep following and not master the thought himself? Small minds, fragile egos and little leaders need that every word of theirs be unquestionably worshipped. But the evolved mind of a true leader, and the leadership of thought is the greatest, looks to go beyond the master-servant bond. It tries to engage with you as an equal, to have you take decisions to leave the final calls to you, as Krishna did with Arjun at the end of the Gita. And so being the follower of the monk is not the primary instinct anymore, because age is now catching up, because perhaps I am now more captured by the drama of this Vivekananda thought, to repeat, quote unquote, the older I grow, the more everything seems to me to lie in manliness. It's not a gender point, it's a courage point in the way he wrote. This is my new gospel. Do even evil like a man. Be wicked if you must on a grand scale. And when this thought came, I said, look, every iconic villain in a movie, from a Joker to a Gabbar, is being evil on a grand scale, so he overshadows the hero sometimes. But anyway, the older I grow, the more everything about following Vivekananda seems to lie in understanding the probing, challenging and questioning message of his life. Not in being a disciple, like we referred to, not in waving incense sticks around his picture, not in being a clerical follower of his writings, and an unquestioning recipient of all his teachings. And here, last sentence of the book, I have begun to think that perhaps the only way to truly follow Vivekananda is to, over time, outgrow the instinct of following itself. Ends.
Can we have one or two questions?
Of course.
Anybody like to ask? Just raise your hand and ask a question or an observation. Don't be shy.
As a speaker, there are two takeaways. Either people got everything or they got nothing.
Let me do the icebreaker.
What I really liked about Anshulji's book and his presentation is this. that Vivekananda was unique, and he is immediately useful to anybody who really wants help and guidance. You don't have to be conventionally religious or spiritual. Whatever your problem in life is, whatever issue you have in life, you can delve into Vivekananda and get light and inspiration and strength. You quoted Roma Rolla there. Says 30 years after Vivekananda had passed, he's reading the books and it's like getting an electric shock. So not only wonderful ideas and insights, but actual inspiration and strength you get from Vivekananda by reading the words of Vivekananda. Vivekananda himself said that it may be that I will see fit to give up this body, but I shall not cease to work. I shall be a voice without a form. So those books, I said, you must show those books to us. See how worn out and underlined and falling apart, and that's the the way a book should be read again and again. Anybody who wants to make an observation? Or yes. Tell us your name and ask the question.
My name is Jayant. Thank you, Anshulji, for this great presentation. I have a small, I need a little more elaboration on the point of leadership that you mentioned. From your personal experience, how did you apply those Swamiji's principles in your own life? If you could elaborate a little more.
So, there's no black and white answer, and I'll tell you why there's no black and white answer. Because Vivekananda is not a static personality. So when you read him, you have to understand what he wrote when he was 25 and he wrote when he's 35. They are not always apple to apple. So there's a particular thing that, for example, in my own head, I remember a line, and this is not about leadership, but he said, that at 20, I would not walk on the theatre side of the footpath in Calcutta. At 30, I can live in a house of prostitutes and not say a word of reproach to them. Am I being degenerate, or am I broadening into the all-encompassing love which cannot judge anybody? So when you see him that way, you realize that what he wrote at 22 and notionally or spoke to somebody or whatever. So even though it's a small lifespan, so even in leadership, there are things that I followed from him and about him. And then when I came to an older stage of life, and I read his things which he was writing at his older was 37, 38, 39. In fact, I have written a detailed element on his death, because 5 years earlier he wrote in a letter saying, I know the time and the place, but I have to keep on working. So I have a chapter in my book entirely on the manner of his dying. It was a very conscious life that he lived. It's hardly accidental, as we know. But here, to tell you something, the thing I have learned about my leadership is what not to do with it. So there's a quote from him which he put when he was late. I put it on my Instagram once, not that I have many followers. I'll read out for you. It's a small quote, which... And the footnote for me is Vivekananda thought that that connects better as you age. Behind my work was ambition. Behind my work was ambition. Behind my love was personality. Behind my purity was fear. Behind my guidance, the thirst of power. Now they're vanishing and I drift. So this, as I grew into my 40s, I put this up to read once in a while, because as managers, and like I said in the other one, like that I would try to tell people how you should be working. And then I realized, no, but do not be in a hurry to give your thoughts. If the person is not ready for it, there is no point having a discussion. If I am not authentic enough, he will not understand it. So everybody tries to understand life lessons as to what to do. I think the more important thing is what not to do. So what I have learned is to stop, to minimize with time the need to train and tell people, look, I have learned this, I will teach you. They don't want that to begin with. Secondly, if it is actually logical, then it is a lotus in the bees. If somebody wants a thought, they will come to you. You cannot ram a thought down people's throats. And the other part is this question to me, which I often ask myself, behind my guidance was the thirst of power. Sometimes in being a leader, you try to mentor people. Is it genuine concern, or is it you wanting to fulfill that aspiration of being this, boss batayega? So you have to keep cutting your ego. I think that is better leadership than the other way around.
So much.
The question which follows from what you just said about giving ideas and thoughts to others and guidance to others. This is something I get a lot, especially from parents who have become very enthusiastic about Vedanta and Vivekananda suddenly, and the first reaction is to, how do I get my children interested?
Yes, they think you're a doctor who will give a vitamin C pill to the child who will start reading
yes. Now you were introduced, very fortunately you and I both, in our teens, in our childhood, we were introduced to Vivekananda. But what would you like to say to a mother, a father who wants their teenage son or daughter to suddenly have the same passion and interest in spirituality and Vivekananda and Vedanta as they have developed now in their maybe 30s, 40s or 50s?
Parents never understand that you only shape the child's DNA, nothing more. And I think it's a losing battle. Honestly, at my age, my stage, I have grown to be more selfish. I want my moksha, I want my peace. I do not care what the rest of the world does. Because this collective search for peace is very taxing. Christ could do it. I have no wish to, be staked into anything. So, and also it's not possible, like this whole, it's like having a moral science class in school. If they work, nobody would steal ever. The worst thing you can do to a child is to ram down his throat a philosophy. He will never embrace it for the rest of his life. So my children have never been taught to read Vivekananda. What they have been taught is, I don't care how many marks you get. And I've written in the book that as an Indian middle class parent, my most interesting phase was when one of my children had a class 10th board, the other had class 12th board. Apparently you're supposed to go mad that year because it's you giving the examination. I couldn't care less. And I couldn't care less again, who is the problematic influencer? Now here, of course, the advantage is if the power bank runs out, you have the original plug. Vivekananda has the answer, Ramakrishna has the answer. So Ramakrishna's, because I read Ramakrishna after I read Vivekananda, in reverse. And his model about talking to somebody saying, the zamindar in Bengal has this, the nurse, and she handles zamindar's children like they're her own. Hari has eaten, Hari has not eaten, Hari has showered. But when the zamindar says, now go to the other house, she leaves the child and walks away. She'll care for the child, but she doesn't own the child. And so he said, you should look at your children like a nursemaid has. They are a responsibility. Don't take ownership. And my take was, my own mind is so messed up, I can't deal with two teenage minds also. So you handle your own lives. But I don't want to micromanage. You want to read, you want to not read, no difference. But and see, this happened with me in a very different way. And part of why Vivekananda sort of sorted my space was because if I had not read Vivekananda, I would have been somebody who was very proud of being non-religious. Because what was religion? So religion for us at that stage was, आपको मंगलवार को ये करना है, सोमवार को ये करना है. So and I would say, okay, but pardon me, but if this is ancient Hindu tradition, but the calendar is Christian. So how did Tuesday happen like 5,000 years back? There was no Tuesday. What is this about? How can I have a Sunday religion and a Monday religion and not eating this on Tuesday? How is that? How does the deity know what day it is? I thought God is timeless. How is he bound by the week? It's a very limited model of the God. Also in all other things, like if we had either Aarti. So our religion got confined to Sukh Sampatti Ghar Aave Kasht Mite Tanka. But how much Sukh Sampatti can come to your house by ringing a bell? And so I had these questions as a 8, 10, 12-year-old, that if the worship Lakshmi brings you wealth, how is America richer than us? If there is no Lakshmi Puja in America, how are they affluent? Why are we not affluent? We do this every evening. So it doesn't make sense. This is not religion, that ring this in the evening, don't eat this food in the morning, read this. That takes me off. It makes me think this is a very servile model of, how can this be God? Because people who are not doing this are also earning their daily living and their fitness is perhaps better than ours, their wealth is better than ours. So, Sukh Sampatti or Kasht Tanka kaise mitega? I mean, you have to die, right? So on the one hand, your Aarti says that let the body be freed of its ailments, but on the other hand, you have the Buddha. His basic question is, is that old man going to be me? Is that sick man going to be me? Is that dead man going to be me? So if death and old age, and this is what is inevitable, how long can you defer it by ringing a bell? I once asked a Swamiji about something and he said, Beta, God will take care of your health. I said, Swamiji, why is there expiry date to his taking care of my health? If he loves me, does he not love me at 95 anymore? How can you link this to his love for me? Because then it's a short-term equation. That he will love you from age 0 till 65, 70, then his love will diminish every year. Then you will end up in old age home. What does that even mean? So that religion was too docile. It didn't answer any of my questions.
One more question.
Thank you, Anshulji, for a very illuminating lecture. I have just one question about something which you probably did not touch in this lecture, which is a book that you wrote called Work Sucks or Do You? So, can you say a few things about that? Did Swami Vivekananda also had an influence on that?
He of course he did. The younger generation doesn't like the tone of that book. But the point was that for me, work came from his basics. And his basics, I mean, if I were to open that chapter here, it's a very uncomplicated thing. No work is petty. Just 4 words. No work is petty. People don't get that. Everybody wants to say, if somebody is driving an Uber, he wants to say, I want to fly a plane. Drive the car well, man. Start with that, no? So people do the current work they have badly, thinking I'll do some grand work better. But you don't get grander work by doing your current work badly. So for me, no work is petty is not a theory. I was standing making a newspaper in a by-lane of Jammu, and I was given page 10 to make. Page 10 was the most irrelevant part of that paper. I was not a very popular person at office ever. Now on that page I'll invest so much energy that it will begin to look like the best page in that paper. The paper sells 5,000 copies, makes no difference to anybody. But when I was making that page, one day the man who was handling front page, the designer of the front page, he looked at me and said, I'll say this in Hindi, then I'll translate back, कि बेटा तुम ऐसे काम करते रहोगे ना एकदम front page भी बनाओगे. So he said, if you keep making that page well, one day you'll handle the most important page of the paper. And I did. So my take was, if I had made that page badly, saying, I've been given this random page, I'll make it trashily and go home, how would that lead to growth? So the first part, that I am not a fan of the melancholy worker saying this work is not really what I had signed up for. Who knows what you signed up for? Life doesn't tell you what you signed up for. Why will your office have that obligation to you? So part 1, doing well the duty nearest to us. You cannot choose what your duty is. And the expectation from a system of that it will come back to you and reward you. So I have gone on to World War II, Swamiji, for your reference, because when people say to me, you're a bad boss, I said, dude, the gentleman who won the Battle of Britain, Dowding, he won it in a model of functioning which was not aligned to the British High Command or the RAF bosses. So while the battle was on, they kept him. Once the Germans stopped, they transferred him out and he was retired. So that's Dowding. And then on the other side, there is Rommel. Rommel is the guy for whom Churchill says in the House of Lords, when North Africa was going all the way against them. And to justify Britain's bad performance in North Africa, he says, across the din of war, if I can say, we are facing a great general. For Churchill to praise the German general on the floor of Parliament in the middle of war, it's not an easy task. And then I tell people, this is what Rommel's reputation was, and then how did Rommel die? Did the British get him? Did the French get him? No. Hitler sent him a poison pill. So I said, Dowding gets shafted by the British, Rommel gets killed by Hitler, you think I'm a bad boss? The world is not supposed to come back to you and reward you. And that's at that level. What are you saying? No, I did something and I need justice in my life. Justice, that's not the way things work. It's not about apple to apple. Life is not a financial year. That I will get something at the end of 8 months and that is how justice is. You have to master your craft, irrespective of the rewards coming at that very moment. Because if your craft stays with you, you will find your way. If your craft is lost, then, in cinema we see, you can, and people often talk about these things that, lobbyism and favoritism and this and that, as a model, somebody got ahead, I didn't have a connection, I didn't have a relative, I got left behind. And I say, please watch cricket, please watch cinema, the obsessions of India. How many people have put their, I don't want to take names, but somebody's brother, somebody's sister, somebody's whatever is put into a movie. You can give them the movie, you can't give them the opening. The audience can't handle it. You can put your son into the cricket team, but will the Australian bowler respect him? He'll still lose the middle stump. You cannot plant people into success. You can give them a slot in the movie, you can give them a slot in the team, but you can't make them play. So there is no point saying, oh, somebody got ahead of me. Let somebody get ahead of you. It will happen. Because what he says, that don't grumble at the little thing. And grumbling is the fundamental destroyer of your career. You making tea, you're making coffee, you're driving a cab, whatever you are doing, the job is not petty, your approach to it is petty. It's a different thing. And you can do a big job and still have a very petty approach. Because as the Peter principle says, you don't always rise to what you can do, you rise to a level of incompetence. When you can no longer be promoted, you stop there. So a lot of journalists can't fight. That is how life is. That's a managerial rule. So his universe is a radical. You don't crib about the regular stuff. So that's why I put that visual on the book. That everybody comes to work and says, "Oh my God, life is so unfair." Life is unfair outside and beyond work as well. You don't know when you will die. That's the most unfair thing. But you want the promotion and increment decided beforehand. How is that going to work? When COVID happens, companies sack people by the dozens, not because they're incompetent, because the company doesn't have money to pay anymore. So inherently, like going to anything, going to a relationship, going to an office with this ROI expectation. I have delivered this, now I will get this much back by the end of the year. I don't think that has ever worked. And when you expect that, you grumble. You grumble at people, you grumble with institutions. So I think his model it's tough love, but it is more true. And I am therefore less accommodating of, oh, so bad. I mean, everybody's life is bad. What is unique to yours that it should not be? It's fine.